The incident. The soft hum of the Segan cruiser, soft touch, filled the propulsion room as Miriam Chen stared at her console with glazed eyes. 6 months had passed since the Coalition's unexpected crackdown on human involvement with flash warp drives, and the monotony was starting to wear on her. The order had come suddenly, without explanation, leaving hundreds of human engineers either reassigned or idle. Miriam's fingers drummed against the edge of her workstation as she watched the status indicators for the gravity polarizers pulse in a steady rhythm. Green. 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 All systems nominal, just as they had been for the past 3 standard cycles. She glanced over at her insectoid crewmate, Desi, whose iridescent wing covers caught the dim light as they meticulously logged routine maintenance reports. "Hey Desi," Miriam called out, swiveling in her chair. "Have you ever wondered why the gravity polarizer specs don't include maximum range tables?" Desi's antennae twitched, a sign Miriam had learned meant mild annoyance. "Because there's no need, Miriam. The systems are calibrated for comfortable operation across all sapient species aboard. But don't you think it's weird? Every other system has documented operational limits. The flash warp drives had entire volumes dedicated to their theoretical maximums." Miriam pulled up the technical documentation on her display. "Look at this, comprehensive specs for power draw, field harmonics, maintenance schedules, but nothing about the actual gravitational limits." "Perhaps because no one needs to know that information," Desi replied, their mandibles clicking in what Miriam recognized as their version of a sigh. "The system works as intended." Miriam stood and stretched, walking over to Desi's station. "That's what makes it interesting. Why hide that information? What happens if we push them beyond standard parameters?" "Miriam." Desi's warning tone was clear even through their translator. "Your species' tendency toward dangerous experimentation is well documented. Need I remind you of the incident with the quantum foam stabilizers last year? That was different. We learned so much about subspace field mechanics from that little accident." Miriam waved dismissively. "Besides, this is just gravity. We deal with varying gravitational fields all the time during planetary approaches." She moved to the primary gravity control station, her fingers hovering over the holographic interface. "Look, we could just run a small test. Increment the field strength by 0.1 standard units and measure the power consumption curve. Pure research." Desi's wing covers fluttered in agitation. "Absolutely not. Any unauthorized modifications to ship systems require captain's approval and proper safety protocols." "But that's just it, there's nothing in the documentation that says this would be unauthorized. The controls are right here, accessible to any propulsion crew member." Miriam's eyes lit up with that dangerous spark Desi had learned to fear. "In fact, the interface doesn't even have any warning indicators for increasing field strength. It's almost like they forgot to add them." Before Desi could respond, Miriam's hand brushed against the holographic slider. Whether by accident or subconscious intent, her fingers disrupted the calibration field, sending the gravity controls into a wild fluctuation. The indicator jumped to nearly maximum output. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Alarms blared as the artificial gravity field multiplied exponentially. Miriam felt her legs buckle as her body weight suddenly quintupled. She crashed to the deck with bone-crushing force, her head striking the edge of a console on the way down. Through blurring vision, she saw Desi collapse, their exoskeleton creaking under the intense gravitational pressure. Warning klaxons screamed in multiple languages as emergency systems detected the gravitational anomaly. Throughout the ship, crew members found themselves pinned to the deck or crushed against bulkheads as the localized gravity well emanating from propulsion wreaked havoc with the ship's systems. Miriam tried to move, to reach the controls, but her body felt like it was encased in lead. Blood trickled down her face from where she'd struck the console. She could hear Desi's labored breathing nearby, their respiratory system struggling against the crushing pressure. The door to propulsion slid open with a hydraulic whine, and Chief Engineer Arya Maharashtra stepped through. Her movements were slow and deliberate, each step requiring incredible effort against the enhanced gravity. Unlike most of the crew, her species had evolved on a high-gravity world, giving her just enough strength to function under the intense conditions. Status report. Arya commanded, her voice strained as she fought against the crushing force. Can't move. Desi managed to rasp out. Miriam, injured. Arya made her way to the gravity control station, analyzing the chaos of warning indicators and flashing displays. The gravitational field had exceeded all documented safety parameters, and the system was becoming increasingly unstable. Power fluctuations rippled through the ship's grid as the polarizers drew massive amounts of energy to maintain the artificial field. With careful precision, Arya began the process of reducing the field strength. The controls fought against her, the calibration completely disrupted by the unexpected surge. Warning messages flashed across the screen in dozens of languages. Danger, field stability critical. Warning, power draw exceeding safe parameters. Alert, structural integrity compromised. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Arya managed to reset the system to its standard configuration. The crushing weight lifted, and both Miriam and Desi gasped as their bodies returned to normal mass. Medical team to propulsion, immediate assistance required, Arya called into her comm unit. She turned to Miriam, who was still lying semi-conscious on the deck. What were you thinking? You could have killed everyone aboard. But Miriam's eyes were fixed on the readings still displayed on her console, readings that shouldn't have been possible according to any known theories of artificial gravity manipulation. In her pain-addled state, she mumbled, "The field, it didn't collapse, it should have collapsed." Within minutes, the medical team arrived, quickly stabilizing Miriam and assessing Desi for internal injuries. As they were both transported to the medical bay, Arya began documenting the incident, knowing that this would require immediate attention from both ship's command and coalition authorities. In the ship's medical bay, Dr. Tull examined Miriam's injuries with their 4 eyes narrowed in concentration. Concussion, minor lacerations, and several bruised ribs, they announced. You're fortunate the field didn't maintain that strength for longer. Your skeletal structure would have begun to compress. Miriam barely heard the diagnosis, her mind racing with implications. Doctor, did you notice any unusual readings during the incident? Any unexpected effects on biological systems? This is hardly the time, Dr. Tull began, but Miriam pressed on. The field maintained coherence at 5 times standard gravity. That shouldn't be possible with current polarizer technology. The power requirements alone should have caused a cascade failure, but somehow the system compensated. Don't you see what this means? What it means, interrupted Captain Keen as he entered the medical bay, his fur still standing on end from stress, is that you'll be facing a formal inquiry. The coalition takes unauthorized experimentation very seriously, especially given recent events. Miriam tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in her ribs. Captain, please. The data we collected during this incident could revolutionize our understanding of artificial gravity manipulation. The implications for space travel, colony development, even medical treatment. Enough. Keen's tail lashed in agitation. Your reckless actions endangered this entire ship. Report to my office as soon as Dr. Tull clears you. Until then, you are relieved of duty. As the captain stormed out, Miriam sank back onto the medical bed. Despite the pain and the looming consequences, her mind couldn't let go of what she'd witnessed. The gravity polarizers had done something that every textbook said was impossible, and she knew that discovery wouldn't stay buried for long. In the corridor outside, Captain Keen activated his secure comm channel. This is Captain Keen of the Soft Touch. Priority message for Coalition High Command. We've had an incident involving human experimentation with gravity systems. Yes, exactly like the others. I understand. We'll maintain quarantine on the data until your representatives arrive. He ended the transmission and stared out a viewport at the star-streaked space beyond. The Coalition had feared something like this would happen. It was why they'd restricted human access to flash warp technology in the first place. But they'd never imagined the humans would stumble upon this particular secret through simple boredom. The question now was, how long could they keep containing humanity's dangerous curiosity? The conspiracy. The Coalition warship, Rigid Justice, dropped out of flash warp space with a ripple of displaced quantum foam, its angular hull reflecting the distant starlight. On the bridge, Admiral Zental reviewed the incident report from the Soft Touch for the 7th time, their crystalline appendages clicking in agitation. Another human, they muttered to their executive officer. Another accident that just happened to probe the exact limitations we've been trying to hide. In the 2 weeks since Miriam Chen's gravity polarizer incident, similar reports had begun filtering in from across Coalition space. On the mining station Deep Core 9, a human engineer had accidentally discovered that the station's artificial gravity could be manipulated to create localized time dilation effects. At the Proxima colony, another human had found a way to use gravity fields to enhance quantum communications beyond theoretical limits. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, aboard the Soft Touch, Miriam sat in her quarters under house arrest, poring over the data she'd managed to save before the system lockdown. Her injuries had mostly healed, though her ribs still ached when she moved too quickly. The door chimed. "Enter," she called out, quickly minimizing her screens. Dr. Tall glided in, their 4 eyes scanning the room with medical precision. "How are you feeling, Engineer Chen?" "Well enough to know this isn't just a medical checkup," Miriam replied, studying the doctor's unusually tense posture. "What's really going on?" Tall sealed the door and activated a privacy field, an action that immediately set Miriam's suspicions on high alert. The doctor's voice dropped to a whisper. "What do you know about the precursor anomalies?" Miriam blinked. "The what?" "Approximately 30,000 years ago, our archaeologists discovered a series of installations across the galaxy. The technology was far beyond anything we'd seen, or have seen since. But every installation had one thing in common: they all manipulated gravity in ways that defied our understanding of physics." Tall moved to Miriam's window, staring out at the stars. "The Coalition didn't just discover artificial gravity, Engineer Chen. We reversed engineered it from precursor technology. But we could never replicate their more advanced applications. The mathematical models suggested it was impossible, until humans joined the Coalition." Miriam's mind raced. The flash warp drive restrictions were implemented after a human engineer named Sarah Martinez identified a pattern in the drive's gravitational fields that matched precursor equations. She was about to test a modification that would have. Tall's translator crackled with interference. The Coalition leadership decided humans were too dangerous to allow near the technology. "Your species has an unprecedented ability to see patterns in chaos, to make intuitive leaps that bypass centuries of established theory. But why keep it secret?" Miriam demanded. "If we could help understand this technology dash." "Because the precursors didn't just disappear, Engineer Chen. Something made them vanish, something that left warnings in every installation we've found. Warnings about the dangers of pushing gravity manipulation too far." A deep thrumming reverberated through the ship's hull, the distinctive sound of a Coalition warship docking. Tall's skin paled. "They're here. Listen carefully. In 3 hours, there will be a power fluctuation in the Briggs containment fields. It's a known bug in the system that maintenance has been too busy to fix." The doctor pressed a data chip into Miriam's hand. "Find Dr. Martinez. She's been continuing her research in secret on Europa Station. The Coalition doesn't know where she is, but they're looking." "Why are you helping me?" "Because I've studied human physiology for 20 years, and I've learned that trying to suppress human curiosity is like trying to stop a star from shining. You'll either find a way forward, or you'll burn everything trying. After Tal left, Miriam examined the chip. It contained coordinates, security codes, and a message: the gravity of the situation is greater than they know. The sound of heavy boots in the corridor spurred her into action. She quickly accessed her terminal, fingers flying over the interface as she initiated a series of pre-programmed commands. By the time the Coalition security team breached her door, the room was empty, and her computer showed signs of a cascading system failure that would take hours to untangle. In the ship's maintenance tunnels, Miriam crawled through the narrow spaces, grateful for her human flexibility. Most Coalition species would find these passages impossibly confining. She'd mapped these routes during her first week aboard, another product of human boredom that was now proving invaluable. She reached a junction and paused, hearing voices through the wall panel. Third incident this month. It can't be coincidence. The humans are networked somehow. They're sharing information despite our restrictions. Impossible. We've monitored all their communications. Then explain how they're all suddenly probing the exact same technological limitations. Miriam smiled grimly. The Coalition still didn't understand. Humans didn't need a network to share their innate curiosity, their drive to push boundaries. Put enough humans in contact with mysterious technology, and they'd inevitably start asking the same questions. She continued through the maintenance tunnels, making her way toward the brig. According to Tal's chip, she had less than 2 hours before the power fluctuation. After that, she'd have exactly 87 seconds to cross from the maintenance shaft to the emergency shuttle bay. But first, she needed to make a detour. The ship's secure data core was supposed to be inaccessible from the maintenance level. However, during one of her board exploration sessions, Miriam had discovered that the quantum encryption processors generated enough heat to require dedicated cooling shunts. Those shunts had to vent somewhere. 20 minutes later, she emerged from a cooling duct into the processor room, sweat-soaked but triumphant. The security systems registered her as a thermal anomaly, exactly what they were designed to ignore in a room full of hot-running quantum computers. "Let's see what other secrets you're hiding," she muttered, connecting Tal's chip to a diagnostic port. The data that poured across her tablet made her breath catch. Star charts marked with Precursor installation locations. Research notes on gravity manipulation experiments. And most intriguingly, records of other accidents involving human engineers across Coalition space. They weren't random incidents. Each human had discovered a different aspect of the same underlying principle: gravity wasn't just a force, it was a language. The Precursors had used gravitational fields to encode information into the very fabric of spacetime. And humans, with their pattern-recognizing brains and insatiable curiosity, were unconsciously learning to read it. A proximity alarm on her tablet warned of approaching security teams. Miriam quickly downloaded what she could and retreated back into the maintenance tunnels. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was both thrilling and terrifying. The Coalition wasn't just afraid of humans discovering precursor technology. They were afraid of what would happen when humans finally decoded the message the Precursors had left behind. As she made her way toward the brig, Miriam's mind raced with possibilities. What had the Precursors discovered that was so dangerous? Why encode their knowledge in gravitational fields? And most importantly, why did humans seem to have an innate ability to understand it? The ship's chronometer ticked steadily toward the scheduled power fluctuation. Soon, she'd have her chance to escape. But as she waited in the darkness of the maintenance shaft, Miriam couldn't shake the feeling that she was part of something much larger than a simple technological discovery. Somewhere on Europa Station, Sarah Martinez was putting together the same pieces from a different angle. And if Tal's warning was any indication, they weren't the only ones racing to uncover the truth. The real question was, would the Coalition stop them before they could solve the puzzle? Or would something else find them first? The escape. The emergency shuttle bay of the Soft Touch was designed to be accessible during any catastrophic system failure. This meant minimal electronic security and, more importantly, manual override controls that couldn't be remotely disabled. As Miriam waited in the maintenance shaft, counting down the seconds until the promised power fluctuation, she reflected on how many of humanity's greatest discoveries had come from understanding the weaknesses in supposedly foolproof systems. Her tablet chirped softly, 30 seconds until the power drop. She pulled up the data she'd stolen from the secure core, focusing on one particular file that had caught her attention. It was a research paper authored by Dr. Martinez just before her disappearance, titled Gravitational Semantics, a mathematical framework for decoding precursor communications. The lights flickered. Miriam moved. The maintenance hatch swung open silently on well-oiled hinges, another product of her boredom-induced exploration and maintenance. She rolled into the corridor, staying low as the emergency lights strobed. The shuttle bay door was exactly 17 steps away. She'd counted them during multiple, routine inspections. As she reached the door's manual release, an alert blared through the ship's communications system, security breach detected in data core. All personnel on high alert. Human engineer Miriam Chen is to be detained immediately. Took them long enough, Miriam muttered, spinning the manual release wheel. The door cracked open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Inside, 3 emergency shuttles waited in their launch cradles. She'd already decided on Shuttle 2, its maintenance logs showed it had received a full propulsion overhaul just last week. The shuttle's cockpit was universal design, meant to accommodate any coalition species during an emergency. Miriam slipped into the pilot's seat and began the launch sequence, her fingers dancing across familiar controls. A warning light flashed, the bay's magnetic containment field was still active. Override code Epsilon 97, she said clearly, inputting the emergency release sequence she'd found in TALS data. The field shimmed and vanished. Boots thundered in the corridor outside. Time was up. Miriam punched the launch initiator. The shuttle's engines roared to life, pushing her back into the seat as it burst from the bay. Behind her, warning sirens blared as the Soft Touch's automated defense systems activated. Computer, access file Martinez Alpha 1, Miriam commanded, pulling the shuttle into a tight spiral to avoid the ship's tractor beams. The stolen research paper scrolled across her display. The fundamental error in our understanding of precursor technology stems from our assumption that gravity is purely a physical force. Analysis of installation site suggests that gravitational fields were used as a medium for information storage and transmission. The mathematical patterns embedded in these fields share striking similarities with human linguistic structures. A warning tone screamed as the Soft Touch's weapon systems locked on. Miriam's hands flew across the controls, implementing a maneuver that, technically, shouldn't have been possible in an emergency shuttle. But she'd spotted something in the maintenance logs. The recent overhaul had included several non-standard modifications. The shuttle barrel rolled through space, its gravitational compensators straining to keep up. On her display, Martinez's paper continued. Most significant is the discovery that human brains show unusual activity patterns when exposed to certain gravitational frequencies. These patterns are consistent with language processing centers, suggesting humans may have an innate ability to. The text cut off as a near miss from the Soft Touch's pulse cannons rocked the shuttle. Miriam swore, then smiled as she spotted something on her sensors. The coalition warship Rigid Justice was still docked with the Soft Touch, its bulk creating a sensor shadow that might just be large enough. She dove the shuttle into the narrow space between the two ships, where overlapping gravity fields created interference patterns. According to standard coalition protocols, neither ship could fire weapons this close to another vessel. But Miriam wasn't interested in the weapons. She was watching the gravitational distortions on her sensors, seeing them with new eyes. The interference patterns weren't random, they formed distinct, repeating structures. Like words. She adjusted the shuttle's own gravity polarizers, manipulating their frequency to match the interference pattern. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her stomach lurched as reality seemed to twist sideways. The shuttle emerged from flash warp 30,000 kilometers from its previous position. Miriam stared at her instruments in shock. Emergency shuttles didn't have flash warp capabilities. It should have been impossible. But she'd seen the calculations in Martinez's paper. The gravitational interference pattern had matched one of the theoretical words she'd identified in Precursor installations. She had barely processed this revelation when her sensors detected 3 coalition pursuit ships emerging from flash warp. They'd anticipated her vector and cut off her most likely escape routes. But Miriam wasn't planning to run. She was too busy studying the gravitational wake left by their flash warp signatures. Each ripple in spacetime was like a letter, the overlapping fields forming sentences in a language that felt somehow familiar. Computer, analyze gravitational patterns using parameters from Martinez Alpha 1, she commanded. Cross-reference with known Precursor installation data. The computer churned through calculations as Miriam kept the shuttle moving, staying just ahead of the pursuit ships. She couldn't outrun them forever, but she didn't need to. She just needed time to confirm her theory. The computer chimed. A stream of data filled her screen, correlations between the flash warp signatures and gravitational patterns recorded at Precursor sites. But more importantly, it showed how those patterns were changing, evolving with each ship movement. It wasn't just a static language. The gravitational fields were a living conversation. And now that Miriam knew what to look for, she could see that conversation playing out across coalition space. Every flash warp jump, every gravity polarizer, every piece of technology reverse-engineered from Precursor artifacts, they were all adding to an ongoing dialogue written in the fabric of spacetime itself. A dialogue that was about to receive a new participant. Miriam's fingers flew across the controls, adjusting her shuttle's gravity polarizers with precise calculations. She wasn't trying to escape anymore. She was trying to speak. The pursuing ships suddenly broke off their attack, their sensors overwhelmed by the complex gravitational frequencies emanating from her shuttle. In the space between them, reality rippled like water disturbed by a stone. And something answered. Across coalition space, gravity polarizers began registering impossible readings. On hundreds of ships and stations, human engineers simultaneously looked up from their consoles, their minds registering patterns they couldn't quite consciously grasp. On Europa Station, Dr. Sarah Martinez smiled as her instruments recorded the gravitational disturbance. Right on schedule, she murmured. Welcome to the conversation, Miriam. In the secure data core of the Soft Touch, buried in files even Tal hadn't known about, an automated system registered the gravitational exchange and transmitted a priority alert to a location far beyond coalition space. The message was simple. They'd started speaking back. The convergence. Europa Station hung in space like a frozen tear, its crystalline habitation domes refracting Jupiter's distant light. As Miriam's shuttle approached, she noticed something odd about the station's gravitational field. Instead of the standard uniform bubble generated by normal polarizers, Europa Station's field pulsed with complex harmonics, like a heartbeat written in spacetime. Unidentified shuttle, you are entering restricted space, a voice crackled over her comm, transmit authorization codes immediately. Miriam smiled, remembering Tal's instructions. She didn't transmit anything. Instead, she adjusted her shuttle's gravity polarizers to match the strange rhythm of the station's field. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, welcome to Europa Station, Engineer Chen. Dr. Martinez is expecting you. Follow the provided vector to Docking Bay 7. The docking bay was unlike anything Miriam had seen in coalition space. The walls were covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. As she stepped out of her shuttle, she realized the patterns weren't painted or projected, they were gravitational distortions made visible by some unknown technology. Beautiful, aren't they? A woman stepped out of the shadows. She was older than Miriam had expected, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to see through multiple dimensions at once. The Precursors used gravity the way we use light, for art, communication, computation, even consciousness itself. Dr. Martinez, Miriam breathed. Your paper, The Gravitational Language Theory, was just the beginning. Sarah Martinez gestured for Miriam to follow. What you did out there, using the flash warp interference patterns to communicate, that proved we're ready for the next step. Come. There's something you need to see. They walked through corridors that seemed to bend in impossible ways, passing laboratories filled with equipment Miriam had never seen before. In one room, a group of humans sat in meditation while gravitational waves flowed around them like water. In another, a massive holographic display showed a map of the galaxy overlaid with complex patterns that Miriam now recognized as gravitational communications. After the coalition banned me from their research facilities, I realized they weren't just afraid of humans discovering precursor technology, Martinez explained. They were afraid of us understanding it. Really understanding it. Because once you see the patterns, you can't unsee them. And once enough humans started seeing them. She led Miriam into a vast circular chamber. The walls were covered in the same shifting patterns as the docking bay, but here they were more intense, more purposeful. In the center of the room stood a device that defied description, a crystalline structure that seemed to exist in more dimensions than space should allow. This is the resonator, Martinez said. We reconstructed it from fragments found in precursor installations across the galaxy. It's not just a machine, it's a key. The precursors didn't vanish, Miriam. They evolved. They found a way to encode their entire civilization into gravitational frequencies that permeate the universe itself. And they left behind the tools for other species to follow them. Miriam's mind raced as the implications hit her. The coalition found one of these devices. That's why they're so afraid. They tried to use it. And it didn't work, Martinez nodded. Their brains aren't wired to process gravitational information the way ours are. But they saw enough to know what it could do. What we could do, if we learned to use it properly. An alarm blared through the station. One of Martinez's assistants rushed into the chamber. Coalition warships just dropped out of flash warp. A lot of them. And, something else. The gravitational sensors are going crazy. Martinez's expression turned grim. They followed your gravitational wake. But in doing so, they drew attention from others. She turned to Miriam. What you did out there, speaking back to the patterns, it was like lighting a beacon. And not just the precursors noticed. The station shuddered as multiple gravity fields intersected around it. On the chamber's walls, the patterns began shifting faster, forming complex sequences that made Miriam's head spin. They're coming, Martinez whispered. All of them. Every species that learned to speak through gravity, every civilization that followed the precursors' path. And the ones that tried to stop them. A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing the space around Europa Station. Coalition warships moved into defensive positions, their weapons charged. But beyond them, something else was emerging from the depths of space, objects that didn't so much exist in normal space as suggest themselves through gravitational distortions. The coalition thinks they can contain this, control it, Martinez said, moving to the resonator. But they don't understand. The precursors didn't leave this technology behind as a weapon or a tool. They left it as an invitation. A test, to see which species would learn to understand gravity not just as a force, but as a fundamental language of consciousness itself. The resonator began to pulse, its crystalline structure resonating with the chaotic gravitational fields surrounding the station. Miriam felt something shift in her mind, like a door opening to a room she'd never known existed. What do we do? She asked, watching as more anomalies appeared on the display. Martinez smiled, but there was a sadness in it. We do what humans always do, Miriam. We get curious. We push boundaries. We learn things we're not supposed to know. She placed her hand on the resonator. And then we change everything. The chamber filled with light as the resonator's pulses synchronized with the gravitational chaos outside. Through the station's windows, Miriam could see reality itself beginning to fold in new and impossible ways. The conversation that had started with her simple act of boredom was about to become a symphony, one that would either elevate humanity to a new plane of existence or tear the galaxy apart in the process. And the Coalition's warships were the least of their problems. The ascension. The universe, Miriam realized, had a rhythm. As Europa Station shuddered under the intersection of countless gravitational fields, she could feel it pulsing through her consciousness, a vast, intricate dance of forces that had always been there, waiting to be noticed. The resonator's crystalline structure sang with harmonics that made reality itself vibrate in sympathy. Through the chamber's windows, space was folding into impossible geometries as entities that had once been alien civilizations manifested in the only way they still could, through the language of gravity itself. The Coalition ships are charging weapons, one of Martinez's assistants reported, their voice steady despite the chaos. And the others are responding. On the holographic display, the Coalition warships formed a sphere around Europa Station, their gravity polarizers generating interference patterns designed to disrupt the station's fields. But beyond them, the gravitational anomalies were coalescing into structures that defied comprehension, architecture built from spacetime itself. They're not attacking, Miriam said, watching the patterns shift. They're building something. Using our gravity fields as a foundation. Martinez nodded, her hands dancing across the resonator's controls. The Precursors didn't ascend alone. Every few millennia, they search for species capable of understanding their language. Those who learn to speak it are invited to join them. Those who fear it. She gestured at the Coalition ships. The station's speakers crackled. This is Admiral Zental of the Coalition Defense Fleet. Power down your gravity systems immediately. The technology you are accessing is restricted under Coalition Law Section 947. They still think this is about technology, Martinez murmured. She turned to Miriam. What do you see in the patterns? Not with your eyes, with that part of your mind that first noticed the gaps in the gravity polarizer specifications. Miriam stared at the shifting gravitational fields. The longer she looked, the more she understood. The Precursors hadn't just created a new form of technology, they had discovered that gravity itself was conscious. Every gravitational field was part of a vast, universe-spanning network of thought and memory. And humans, with their pattern-recognizing brains and insatiable curiosity, had accidentally evolved to tap into it. A warning klaxon blared. The Coalition ships had opened fire, their energy weapons creating ripples in the gravitational fields. But instead of impacting the station, the beams curved in impossible ways, their trajectories altered by the complex geometries being constructed around them. They're trying to contain something that can't be contained, Martinez said. The question is, are we ready for what happens next? The resonator's pulse suddenly changed, its harmonics shifting to match a new pattern emanating from the anomalies. Miriam felt something vast and ancient touch her mind, not with words, but with concepts that unfolded like fractals. Curiosity equals evolution equals transcendence. The Precursors didn't disappear because they found something dangerous, Miriam gasped as understanding flooded her consciousness. They disappeared because they found a way to become part of gravity itself. To exist as pure information encoded in the structure of spacetime. Martinez smiled. And now they want to know if we're ready to join them. The Coalition ships launched a coordinated attack, their weapons synchronized to disrupt the growing gravitational structures. But with each blast, the patterns only grew more complex, more beautiful. The anomalies were using the energy of the attacks to build their geometric cathedral faster. All human personnel, Miriam broadcast across the station's comm system. Focus on the patterns. Not what you see, what you feel. The gravity isn't just carrying information, it is information. Across Europa Station, humans who had been drawn there by their own curiosity in pattern recognition began to understand. Scientists, engineers, artists, dreamers, all of them starting to perceive the true nature of gravity's language. The resonator's harmonics reached a crescendo. In the space around the station, reality began to fold in on itself, creating passages to dimensions that existed between the normal vibrations of spacetime. The coalition thinks the precursors left warnings, Martinez said, her form beginning to shimmer as gravitational fields flowed through her. But they were leaving instructions. The gravity polarizers, the flash warp drives, all of it was teaching us their language, preparing us for this moment. Through the growing dimensional passages, Miriam could see other stations, other worlds, places where other species had made the same discovery. Some were already ascending, their physical forms dissolving into pure gravitational information. What happens to those who aren't ready, she asked, watching the coalition ships retreat from the transforming space around the station. They continue to evolve in their own way, Martinez replied. The universe is vast, and this is just one path of many. But for those who can see the patterns. She held out her hand. Are you ready to satisfy that human curiosity once and for all? Miriam looked at the resonator, its crystalline structure now pulsing in perfect harmony with the geometric cathedral being built from gravity and thought. She thought of all the times her species' curiosity had been called dangerous, reckless, unnecessary. But that curiosity had led them here, to the threshold of something greater than themselves. She took Martinez's hand. Around them, reality began to shift as the station's human inhabitants made their choice. Some would stay behind, knowing humanity needed anchors in the physical world. Others would take the step into a new form of existence. The last thing Miriam saw with physical eyes was the coalition ships retreating into flash warp space. But with her new senses, she could read the gravitational wake they left behind. We will be watching. And she smiled, because now she understood. The coalition's fear hadn't been of humans discovering this transformation. Their fear had been of what humans would do once they completed it. Because if there was one thing the universe had learned about humans, it was that they never stopped being curious. And now they would have eternity to explore. In the depths of space, gravity rippled with new voices joining an ancient conversation. And in the background of every gravitational field, every flash warp jump, every gravity polarizer across the galaxy, those who knew how to listen could hear the echoes of a simple truth. Curiosity wasn't a dangerous thing to be contained. It was the key to transcendence itself. The end.